Hi you guys, it's Tonya Gibbs, and today I'm going to share with you a process video creating a mixed media layout featuring products from Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft. This is part of my summer 2014 guest design team projects. We are going to use the Gelatos in the white, Boysenberry in silver. We're also going to use the Gelatos double scoops in the red cherry, champagne, and chocolate. The PITT Artist Pen Black Superfine 0.4 millimeter, Stampers Big Brush Pens in the Deep Scarlet Red 219, the May Green 170, Textural Accents in Whip Spackle and Gesso. So to start with this layout is going to be a patriotic theme. We just celebrated our 4th of July here in the United States, and I'm using some crepe paper ribbon to create a box pleat ruffle, and I'm using my fingers, my 2 fingers, to space out where I glue over the piece that will overlap. Since this glue is really tacky and the paper is very thin, I was able to just glue in one step. Then I took it to my sewing machine and stitched it across after the glue was completely dry so that I would not ruin my needle on my sewing machine. Now I'm going to glue them down onto a piece of white cardstock and overlap them slightly so that they create a really nice ruffle effect. These are going to be the stripes on my American flag. So I have 3 stripes that are going to be long and then 2 that are going to be shorter. That will leave space for the blue area that has. So once my ruffles are all in place, I'm going to grab my Boysenberry gelato and I am going to color in that empty space, the negative space there. That's going to be the place where I place my stars. I'm just going to use a little bit of water to blend out those gelatos. I really love the look of these gelatos. They're so creamy and so vibrant, and they will hold their vibrancy over time, which is another thing that I really love about them. Now I'm going to take the red cherry double scoop gelato and I'm going to color in every other ruffle. Now you have to be very careful with this because you don't want it to bleed through to the white stripe. I'm trying to be neat with this, but to be honest with you, I love the look of the watercolor and the irregular lines, so I'm not being super careful. I wanted this to have that effect like a float, you know, a parade float. We often see these ruffles, you know, all over parade floats, and that was the look I was going for. I do have to be very careful, and you will see me lift those ruffles up, the white ones, so that I do not get them, you know, contaminated. I am going to cover them up with my embellishment, so like I said, I don't have to be super careful. I'm also drying these with the heat tools to ensure that they don't bleed through, and they're good and dry when I lay them down. I really love this look. I thought it really added a lot of depth to my layout, and the red cherry is just a perfect red. It's really luscious. I love it. So now I have taken some wood veneer stars from Studio Calico, and I didn't make you sit and watch me glue them all down, but I glued them down. And then I'm taking the white gelato and I'm going to color the tops of my stars with the white gelato. It's very hard to see it on camera, but it did add an extra little bit of color and texture to these stars. Now it's time to prep my background, and I'm going to use the Gelatos double scoops in the chocolate and the champagne. The champagne has a nice metallic finish, so it will give that little touch of metallic to the edge there. I'm staying close to that edge because I really want this to look vignette, so that my edges are darker than my middle section, and that will just draw your eye towards the center where my photograph will be displayed. So I'm just going to keep working this back and forth with a you know, putting the gelato on and then moistening it with the paintbrush, and then taking this moistened baby wipe and working the color into the cardstock. That base color is Kraft cardstock that I'm using. And I'm just going to continue to do this all the way around the page. Now, one thing I did not show you on camera, but once this was completely dry, I took another piece of cardstock with the exact same color, and I glued this piece to that piece so that it would minimize the amount of buckling that you're going to see from this wet cardstock. It was a bit tricky, but I didn't feel like it needed to be displayed on camera. So again, I'm just going right around those edges one more time to just darken them up a little bit. You can see my little baby wipe getting really dark there. And then once I get back around to the other side, I'm going to come back with the champagne color and just blend that right back into that brown. It's going to soften that brown up, but it's also going to give it a little bit of a sparkle, which is the Independence Day, everything is so sparkly. The parade floats are sparkly. You've got the fireworks at night, so it's really fun to have that little bit of shimmer on your background for a good texture. Now, this is a Crafter's Workshop stencil, and I'm going to use the Whip Spackle. And the stencil's name is called Art Is, and this is the mini Art Is. And I'm just going to add this. It gives a nice little text look to my background and just gives it a little bit more texture as well. I'm going to dry it really good with my heat gun. And then these are just some scraps. I'm really not sure who makes these papers, but these are some scraps that were on my desk. So I'm just using them to the Prima Distress tool to distress them up a little bit. Music is another like iconic thing that we hear a lot on the 4th of July here. And I'm just going to take that chocolate gelato double scoop and I'm going to work that in around the edges of that just to kind of tone it down a little bit. You're not going to see a whole lot of it, but I do want it to have that same distressed look. It was just a little too clean. What I really liked about this paper was the music staff, but also the words that are on it have kind of a patriotic type theme to them as well. Now I'm going to take the gelato double scoop in the red cherry and I'm applying it to this gardenia, and I'm just going to put some of that on my palette and wet it a little bit with the moistened paintbrush and just work that really into those flowers. And you're going to see me paint a couple of these. My idea is to carry my red, white, and blue theme up into my floral spray. So I found that you have to kind of color these from both sides. But I just love the rich and vibrancy of this gelato and how it looks on these flowers. So it's a really great color. And it's okay if it is a little splotchy because I think that kind of adds to the flower a little bit. It gives it a little bit of depth. So here I go. I'm going to work on coloring up that next one. And I'm just basically rubbing that gelato onto the flower and then taking a wet paintbrush and working the color into the petals. Flip it over to the back and make sure you do it again on the back as well. So I'm going to put these to the side to dry, and I'm going to grab out this Die-namites die. This is called the Flowering Branch. I've cut several out on pre-gessoed paper. I like to gesso my paper before I die cut it because these little intricate pieces do get really fragile if you try to paint them up too much. Now I'm taking that boysenberry and I'm working it into those petals or the flowering parts of the branch. Being very careful to stay off of the stems. And by watering this down, it does kind of get it a little bit softer color blue, so I went over it several times. Now I'm taking my Stampers Big Brush Artist Pen in the May Green number 170, and I am coloring up the branches on my flowers. I thought these kind of reminded me a little bit of Forget-Me-Nots. Now I'm going to take the Stampers Big Brush Artist Pen in Deep Scarlet Red 219, and I'm going to use it on my MFT Celebrate stamp to stamp out the word. Now, since this was a fairly new stamp, I had to stamp it a couple of times, so I started to fill it in, but it just wasn't looking neat enough for me, so I went ahead and stamped it again. and the second time it transferred a lot better. Now I'm going to cut that off and use it as a banner on my layout. This will serve as the purpose of my title. So I'm just trying to figure out placement, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut that into a banner. And then I place it onto pop dots, and I'm going to adhere it to a piece of silver glitter paper from Cosmo Cricket. This paper is amazing because it is glitter paper, but it does not shed. Now I'm just going to add that over the top of my Polaroid there. And like I said, that's going to be my title. Now I'm just grabbing just a pastry doily that I got from a dollar store, and I'm going to build out my floral spray on top of it. I left one of the flowers white, and then I have the two flowers that are red that I'm going to put on either side of them. And I'm just using hot glue to apply those down. And then I'm only putting the glue on my floral sprays from the flowering branch at the base. I will go back and glue down the flowers that need to be glued down later, but because I like to tuck things in and I don't want to get anything too glued down, I'm being very careful not to apply glue to places that I may need to lift and use later. So I'm going to build that spray out at a diagonal and just fill in over at the top and at the bottom as well. And don't be afraid to take your die cuts like this and cut them if you need to fill in some other negative spaces, like I've done with this piece. Now I noticed that I had a giant hole, so I had this Melissa Francis heart that's been on my desk for quite a while, so I decided to go ahead and place it there, and it just covers that up really nicely. Now I have some silver ribbon that I'm going to make into a little figure-8 bow and pinch it off in the center with a piece of floral wire. That's going to add the balance of the glitter that you see from under the title. It's going to balance it off over on the right behind the floral sprays and soften up that doily just a little bit. And I love the way that looks sticking out like that. So then I'm going to come back and grab I'm going to grab that silver paper out and cut one more little flag out. I noticed that I created a hole there just above my ribbon where my music paper ends, and that's just going to repeat that flag shape that you have on the title as well. Now I have some Encore A roses from Prima. This was a package that was previously opened, so I love to use up my scraps on things like this. And I'm just going to tuck those in, being careful to follow the rule of thirds, and also what I add to one side of the spray, I'm trying to add again to the other side of the spray, so that everything appears balanced, but it's basically just filling in little holes here and there. And I found a little wooden heart I tucked up at the top. Now I'm taking that Stampers Big Brush Artist Pen in the deep Scarlet Red 219, and I'm coloring this little die cut that I had on my desk. And I've taken some Scallop circles that I ran through my Cuttlebug embossing folder, the Swiss dots, and gave them a little shape. I'm going to create a little banner there under the word celebrate, because I just felt like it wasn't a good transition between where the stripe started and stopped, and this kind of helped to carry out my little feminine accent there, and just kind of give you an easier transition between the title and the ruffle. And it's again just like they have on the floats. You see a lot of those little banners and things like that. Now I'm going to take my gelato in the silver, and I'm adding a little bit of water to it, and I'm going to break it up really good, and I'm going to use it to splatter some ink splatters around the layout. I needed to pull out my palette knife. My brush just wasn't flat enough. I'm going to cover up my photo so I make sure I don't splatter too much. It just needed to be a little more fluid, so a little more water. It's hard for you guys to see the splatters here on the page because of how dark the room is, but when you see the photo you'll see them. Again, I wanted them there. I wanted them subtle, but they didn't need to be prominent on the layout. Just adding a little more texture to that background. Now I'm taking a tag, and this is going to serve purposes of my journaling, and I'm going to take that chocolate gelato double scoop and just color that in to give it a nice distressed look. Going to take my PITT Artist Pen in the Superfine 4mm, and I'm going to add my journaling to that. It's going to tuck in behind. I didn't really want it very visible. I just needed the who, what, when, where, and why of the layout. And then I've added that cute little closed pen, and I'm tucking it under that doily to hide it. Here are a few close-up photos of my layout so you can get a better idea of what they look like. Thank you so much for hanging out with me during this process video. You can really see the sparkles there on this layout from the silver. It's super shiny. And there is my beautiful niece Austin and her beautiful mother Ashley. So thank you to them for letting me use this photo, and thank you guys for hanging out with me today. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I hope that I could inspire you to use those gelatos when you're creating your own personal accents for your layouts. As always, there will be a blog post that accompanies this layout, and in the description box below will be a link to that post as well as all of the products used in today's layout.